They thought humanity was gone forever. Our bones were boxed, our weapons put on display, our entire history reduced to little signs on glass cases for alien schoolchildren to mock. In the heart of the galaxy stood a museum, a mausoleum, really, dedicated to civilizations that had been wiped out. And at the center of it all, under harsh white lights, the humans sat behind glass. Extinct, the plaque said. A conquered species, a forgotten mistake of history. But one night, a guard swore he saw movement in the human exhibit. A skull that wasn't quite where it had been yesterday, a shadow that shifted without a source, and then a sound no one had heard in centuries. A heartbeat. Before we continue, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the rest of this story. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now, let me tell you about the museum they built to celebrate our extinction. The Museum of Extinct Civilizations was larger than some planets. It hung in orbit around a dying sun, its surface plated in black alloys that drank in the light. Inside, the halls stretched for kilometers, lined with the skeletons and ruins of species that had dared to resist the galactic dominion. There were thousands of exhibits. The insectoid Kier, reduced to husks preserved in resin. The crystalline roe, their shattered fragments displayed in ornate glass towers. And there, always the largest crowd, humans. Children of the Dominion gathered in flocks to point at our cracked rifles, our burnt flags, our helmets still stained with soot. The guides told them stories, that we were clever but reckless, ambitious but doomed, that when the Dominion fleet had come to Earth, humans had fought savagely, but their courage only delayed the inevitable. The exhibit ended with a simple conclusion, read aloud on every tour: Homo sapiens, extinct, 2341. But the guides never knew that the words were wrong. The Empire never checked the walls behind the displays. They never looked closely at the ventilation tunnels or the unused maintenance shafts that stretched like veins through the museum. If they had, they might have seen the scratches, claw marks, handprints, places where something alive had been climbing, moving, watching. The first sign came quietly, a missing ration pack from a guard's locker, a camera that flickered to static when no one was near, a glass panel that, when polished in the morning, bore strange fingerprints, 5 digits pressed into the dust. Not alien digits, human ones. Some dismissed it as pranks, others whispered about ghosts. But the truth was stranger, darker, and far more dangerous. Because deep inside the museum, in the forgotten shafts where no light reached, there were voices, human voices, and they were waiting. The night shift guards were the first to notice. They patrolled the endless galleries where the Dominion displayed its trophies, bored out of their skulls, half asleep most nights. But lately, strange things had begun to happen in the human wing. One patrol found the glass of a display smeared with condensation, as though someone had leaned close and breathed on it. Another swore he saw a face in the reflection, not his own but human, pale and gaunt, staring back at him from inside the case. The Dominion dismissed these reports. They called it paranoia, tricks of the light, hallucinations born of fatigue. But behind closed doors, whispers began to spread among the staff. Something was wrong with the human exhibit. And then came the first disappearance. A junior curator named Viral failed to clock out of his shift. His ID badge was found in the archives, but his body was never recovered. Security footage cut to static minutes before he vanished. The Dominion investigated, of course, but their findings were conveniently simple. Equipment failure. Case closed. Yet in the days that followed, the disappearances continued. Guards, technicians, even tourists. Gone. Always near the human wing. Always with the cameras failing at just the right moment. The museum tried to cover it up. Announcements told visitors the missing staff had been transferred. New guards were rotated in, but they too vanished. Still, the Dominion refused to believe the impossible. Humans were extinct. The evidence was right there in the glass cases. And yet, deep in the ventilation shafts, the survivors waited. They weren't ghosts. They weren't illusions. They were flesh and blood, descendants of the few humans the Dominion had thought dead centuries ago when Earth burned. A handful had been captured, displayed alive in the first days of the museum. Curiosities, living fossils. But humans do not stay caged forever. One by one, they escaped the exhibits. One by one, they hid in the dark places where Dominion eyes could not see. Generations passed. Children were born in shadows, raised among whispers and rust. They learned the tunnels better than the architects who built them. They became shadows themselves. And now, the shadows were stirring. The Dominion thought of the museum as a monument. The humans knew it as their home. A grave they had crawled out of. A fortress built of bones and stolen history. And in the silence of the forgotten shafts, plans were being made. The humans did not just want survival. They wanted the galaxy to know one thing: extinction was a lie. And soon someone would have to pay for the mistake of putting them in glass. It began with whispers in the halls. Tourists complained of feeling watched, of hearing footsteps that didn't belong. A guide swore the mannequins had shifted ever so slightly overnight. A guard, brave enough to touch one of the preserved human bodies, reported that its hand was warm. The Dominion called it hysteria. They increased security, patrolled more aggressively, and reassured visitors that the museum was safe. But the humans knew otherwise. They had lived in silence for generations, studying their captors through cracks in the walls. They knew the patrol schedules. They knew where the cameras turned and where they didn't. They had grown lean and hard, eating scraps from forgotten storerooms, hunting vermin in the bowels of the museum. But above all, they had kept something alive: their will. And now, that will was turning into a weapon. The first strike was small, almost laughable. A Dominion noble found his translator device missing after a tour. It reappeared days later in the center of the human wing, placed neatly at the feet of one of the preserved skeletons. A warning. Then the incidents grew bolder. Lights cut out during peak visiting hours. Glass cases shattered without alarms. Display pieces, artifacts stolen from 100 dead civilizations, went missing, only to turn up in impossible places. Inside, locked offices, hanging from ceilings, sometimes arranged into patterns that looked eerily like human writing. The Dominion grew uneasy. This wasn't vandalism. It was a message. Something unseen was moving through the museum, mocking their control, reminding them that even empires had blind spots. And then came the night of blood. A squad of guards patrolling the human wing failed to report back. When reinforcements arrived, they found the floor smeared with crimson and claw marks etched into the walls. The bodies were gone. Only one thing had been left behind, scratched into the glass of the largest human case. 2 words. Words in a language the Dominion had sworn was dead. We live. Panic spread. The museum closed its doors to the public. Soldiers in black armor filled the galleries, sweeping every corridor, every shaft, every vent. But they found nothing. The humans had gone back into the dark, just as quickly as they had struck. The Dominion thought this was an isolated uprising, a handful of feral survivors. What they did not realize was that the shadows in the museum were deeper than they imagined. The humans were not simply hiding. They were multiplying. And every day, more of them learned the truth about what this place really was. Not just a museum of extinction, but a prison of memory. A prison that was about to break. The Dominion sealed the human wing. Steel shutters dropped, alarms blared, and every entrance was locked with layers of biometric security. Guards with plasma rifles stood at every corner. The message, "We live," was erased, the glass polished until it gleamed. The officials declared the incident contained. But containment was an illusion. The humans moved freely through the guts of the museum. Air ducts, old drainage pipes, forgotten maintenance shafts. The Dominion had built the museum as a shrine to its power, but it was also a labyrinth, full of blind spots the architects had never cared about. To them, it was a monument. To the humans, it was a hunting ground. And so, the games began. One guard disappeared during a midnight sweep, then another. Security cameras showed nothing, just flickers of static, as though the humans could bend the eyes of machines. The Dominion tightened its grip, sending drones into the crawl spaces. Only half of them came back. The others transmitted a final few seconds of terror, shadows moving, glints of makeshift blades, the sound of breathing too human to be anything else. Whispers reached the council chambers of the capital world. Advisors spoke cautiously, but fear was plain in their voices. Perhaps the humans were never truly extinct. Others dismissed it. These are vermin, relics, no threat to us. But then the sabotage began. Power grids flickered across the museum. Whole wings went dark, forcing priceless exhibits to be evacuated. A reservoir used for cooling the quantum archives was poisoned. By what, no one could say. Even the translation algorithms faltered, spitting out words in human tongues that hadn't been spoken in centuries. It was no longer just rebellion, it was warfare, silent, precise, and unnervingly intelligent. The Dominion began to wonder. How had these humans survived? They had starved them, dissected them, displayed their bones like trophies. Yet here they were, lean, sharp-eyed predators that had adapted to the darkness. And worst of all, they were learning. The missing guards' weapons began reappearing, not discarded, not broken, modified. Plasma rifles stripped apart, their cores refitted into crude but deadly traps. Dominion scanners found heat signatures where no heat should be. Someone was repurposing museum tech into something new. One general, in a rare moment of honesty, whispered the truth no one wanted to hear. We put wolves in a cage, and then we taught them how to hate. The museum was no longer a monument. It had become a battlefield, and the question was no longer if the humans would strike again, but when. The Dominion believed the museum belonged to them. They had built it as a theater of conquest, a place to parade the dead and remind the living who ruled the galaxy. But in the shadows of its endless halls, the ownership of the museum was shifting. The humans moved like whispers, like smoke sliding through cracks. Every day, more Dominion systems faltered, lights flickered, sensors lied, doors sealed or opened without command. It was as though the museum itself was betraying its masters. Then came the first coordinated strike. It began with sound. In the wing of fallen empires, where the ruins of a dozen conquered civilizations were displayed beneath glass domes, the intercoms activated. At first, it was static. Then slowly, a voice. Harsh, guttural yet steady, speaking in a tongue that translators couldn't smooth into Dominion speech. It was human. The guards froze as the voice rolled across the chamber, echoing off ancient stone and shattered relics. They didn't understand the words, but the tone chilled them. It wasn't rage, it wasn't desperation, it was a promise. And then the lights went out. When they came back, the guards were gone. No bodies, no blood. Just empty armor shells, stacked neatly at the center of the chamber as though arranged for display. A new exhibit had been added overnight, and no one could say how. The Dominion panicked. They reinforced the entire wing with soldiers, turrets, drones. But that night, the power grids failed across half the museum. In the dark, muffled sounds echoed. Metal scraping, heavy thuds, the crack of weapons. When the lights returned, the soldiers who had been stationed at the fallen empire's wing were found bound and gagged, dangling upside down from the very exhibits they once guarded. Pinned to one soldier's chest was a shard of polished glass with words scratched deep into its surface. "You are next." The message spread like wildfire. Officials tried to contain it, But fear doesn't obey borders. Guards began refusing assignments near the human sector. Engineers sabotaged their own systems just to avoid entering the museum. And outside, in the wider dominion, rumors grew louder. Citizens whispered that the museum's exhibits were coming alive, that the humans were ghosts of vengeance. Some even claimed to have heard the voices of the dead echoing through the walls. The dominion faced a dilemma. Admit the truth, that the humans had returned, or keep lying, even as control slipped further. But while the Dominion argued, the humans prepared something larger, something not just meant to terrify, but to declare war. The museum's grand atrium, a vast chamber that hosted visitors from across the stars, would soon become more than a hall of history. It would become the stage for humanity's rebirth. The Dominion believed they could silence rumors. That fear was only a spark, easily smothered by propaganda and patrols. But fear spreads like fire when oxygen is everywhere. And in the museum's grand atrium, the fire was about to erupt. The atrium was the heart of the museum, a cathedral of glass and steel. Vast skylights bathed the chamber in pale light from the system's star, illuminating exhibits that towered like monuments. Ancient warships floated in suspension fields, fossilized beasts loomed in amber light, and holographic histories played endlessly on the walls. It was here that visiting delegates came to gawk, to marvel, to be reminded of the Dominion's eternal power. On that day, hundreds of officials, officers, and curious citizens wandered the halls. Guides pointed out the shattered thrones of fallen kings. Children pressed their hands against the glass that caged ancient weapons. The Dominion's anthem played softly in the background. And then, silence. The music cut mid-note. The holograms blinked out. A hush fell over the crowd as every light in the atrium dimmed to black. For a moment, only breath and shifting feet filled the darkness. Then the skylights above, the ones made of reinforced crystal, unbreakable by any natural force, shattered. Glass rained down like ice, but not a single shard touched the crowd. They froze, suspended in the air, caught by invisible hands. Slowly, impossibly, the shards rearranged themselves, hanging above the atrium like stars. The crowd gasped. A shape formed in the floating constellation, the crude outline of a human skull. And then came the voice. Not over the intercoms, not from any single speaker. The sound vibrated in the bones of everyone present, deep, resonant, terrible. "We are not extinct," gasps, cries. Some ran, but the exits sealed. Others dropped to their knees, praying to whatever gods they thought could save them. The shards of glass shifted again, rearranging into words that burned into memory. "The museum is a lie." The officials scrambled. Soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. But the moment they fired, their rifles bent in their hands, twisted into knots of useless metal. And then, figures appeared. Not fully seen, but glimpsed in flickers. Shapes moving between shadows, human silhouettes woven from light and static. They strode through the crowd, touching no one, yet everyone recoiled as though death itself brushed against them. One figure climbed atop the broken throne of a long-dead emperor, its outline sharpened for just an instant. A human, not pale or starved as the propaganda had shown them, but strong, upright, with eyes that glowed like embers. It raised a hand. The skull constellation above the atrium shattered, sending shards raining down again, this time embedding into the floor, forming a single word that all could read. Remember. The lights returned. The crowd blinked in the sudden brightness. The figures were gone. The glass was gone. But the word remained scorched into the floor of the atrium, impossible to erase. News of the event spread beyond the Dominion before censors could act. By the end of the cycle, every system was whispering about it. And for the first time in centuries, The galaxy remembered humans not as relics, but as hunters who had returned to stalk their jailers. The Dominion claimed control over billions of stars. They could silence uprisings, crush rebellions, erase history with a stroke of decree. But nothing spreads faster than a story no empire wants told. The Atrium Incident, as people began to call it, was impossible to contain. Hollow footage leaked before censors arrived. Pilgrims who fled the museum carried tales across trade routes. Whispers grew into shouts. The words scorched into the floor, "Remember," became a chant. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion was not feared. It was doubted. And doubt is poison to empires. Inside the highest towers of Dominion Command, panic festered. The Arch-Council met in emergency session, their crystalline chamber glowing with angry light. Hollow screens replayed the event over and over, the shattered glass, the burning word, the human silhouette. "This is impossible," one counselor hissed, its mandibles clicking in fury. "They are extinct, erased, no human lives remain." But another leaned forward, its many eyes narrowing. "And yet they appeared. Which is more dangerous, that humans survived, or that their memory has learned to fight?" Armies were deployed. Fleets ringed the museum's orbit, their shadows blotting out the stars. Whole systems were placed under martial law. Spies were dispatched to hunt for traces of humanity, combing ruins, archives, forgotten corners of the galaxy. But every effort backfired, because the people no longer feared silence. In marketplaces, children scratched the word "remember" into stone. In prisons, inmates chanted it through the bars. Merchants began selling pendants shaped like skulls, claiming they were human charms against Dominion lies. The museum, once a monument to conquest, became a pilgrimage site for the defiant. Visitors came not to gawk at extinct species, but to kneel at the scorched word, to touch it with trembling hands as though it were sacred. And in the shadows of the galleries, the figures returned. They never lingered long. A flicker by the fossilized titans, a silhouette passing through the shattered armor of ancient kings. But always human, always watching. Soldiers posted in the halls fired at ghosts, their bolts burning empty air. Others swore the shadows whispered in their ears, telling them secrets they could not bear to repeat. Fear began to eat the Dominion from the inside. And then the unthinkable happened. One of the arch-counselors, the same who had called the humans extinct, was found dead in their private chamber. Not assassinated, not poisoned, dead from fear. The guards swore they heard a voice in the counselor's chamber before the death. A human voice whispering only one word: "Remember." The Dominion realized then that this was not rebellion. It was infestation. Not an army at their gates, but a nightmare already inside their halls. And the question spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Had humans returned from extinction, or had they never left at all? The Dominion believed the museum was stone and steel. Walls could be patrolled, doors could be sealed, exhibits could be monitored and guarded. But the museum was never just a building. It was memory carved into reality, and memory does not obey orders. It began with the halls themselves. Archivists reported that wings seemed to shift overnight. Corridors curved where they had once run straight. Chambers lengthened, stairways twisted, ceilings rose into cathedral heights that hadn't been built by any hand. Maps failed. Security patrols vanished, reappearing hours later, shaken and pale, swearing the corridors had led them in circles. Then came the exhibits. A fossil of the star titans, creatures so vast they once blotted out suns, was found moving, its chest rising as though drawing phantom breath. The preserved skeleton of the Geleth serpents rattled in its glass case as if coils were tightening, scales scraping against stone. And always, at the heart of the museum, the human gallery changed the most. The shattered display no longer held still rubble. The burn mark of the word "remember" deepened, glowing faintly as though carved into living ember. Visitors swore they heard footsteps echoing before they entered. Holograms flickered to life on their own. Human figures standing tall, holding weapons, building cities, laughing around fires. They were not Dominion-approved reconstructions. They were something else, something raw. Even the guards stopped looking too long into the gallery, afraid of what might stare back. The Dominion dispatched engineers to stabilize the museum. They arrived with tools and sensors, determined to anchor the shifting halls with technology. But every instrument malfunctioned. Compasses spun wild, scanners blared with impossible readings. And then, one night, the lead engineer vanished. His crew found his boots neatly placed outside the human gallery. Nothing else. Inside, carved freshly into the wall where the glass had shattered, a new phrase had appeared. "We remember." The news leaked before the Dominion could suppress it. Billions across the stars whispered the words like prayer. What had begun as doubt was now spreading into faith. The museum was no longer a collection of extinct civilizations. It was becoming their resurrection ground. Every night, more changes came. Empty alcoves filled with sounds, laughter, roars, battle cries. Statues leaned forward when no one watched. Shadows thickened in places where no light could explain them. Visitors who braved the halls began leaving gifts, trinkets, tools, fragments of old songs. They claimed the shadows accepted them. Some swore they heard words of gratitude whispered in human voices. The Dominion's grip tightened, but the museum slipped further beyond their control. The more they tried to cage it, the more it lived. And across the galaxy, one terrifying question grew louder in every marketplace, every barrack, every whispering alley. If the museum was awakening, what else might awaken with it? The Dominion had tolerated whispers before, dissent, rumors, superstition, but never this. The museum was no longer a relic. It had become a force, a living scar in the heart of their empire. So the High Council convened. Their chamber was ringed with guards, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors, though every one of them kept glancing toward the towering skyline where the museum loomed like a second city. "Shut it down," one counselor demanded. His crest quivered with fear. "Torch the archives, collapse the foundations, salt the ruins, whatever it takes." "And if it fights back?" another asked. "You've seen the reports. The halls move, the exhibits breathe. How do you burn something that refuses to stay still?" Silence fell. For the first time in generations, the Dominion was debating not how to rule, but whether their rule still meant anything. At last, the first speaker spoke. His voice was low, heavy, burdened with centuries of certainty that now cracked. "If this museum is no longer stone and steel," he said, "then it is thought. And thought spreads faster than fire. Destroy it, and every citizen will ask why. Allow it to live, and they will ask what it means. Either way, control slips from our grasp." The chamber went quiet. But in the shadows, not all voices belonged to the living. Invisible to the Dominion, echoes rippled through the chamber walls. Human laughter, human whispers. They're afraid. They know what they've built. Outside, unrest was growing. Crowds gathered before the museum gates, chanting the words that now spread like contagion. "We remember." The Dominion deployed soldiers. They formed barricades, raised weapons, ordered dispersal. But when they fired warning shots into the air, the bullets bent. The sound warped, echoing back tenfold, a thunderclap that knocked soldiers from their feet. And the museum doors, sealed for centuries, creaked open. The crowd went silent. Soldiers froze. Inside, a corridor stretched into darkness, though none had ordered it unlocked, and along the walls burned a line of symbols no one could translate. But every species who looked upon them understood. The message was human. The message was defiance. The Dominion panicked. They sent demolition squads armed with plasma drills and charges designed to tear mountains apart. The squads marched in, their weapons humming, their orders clear: collapse the foundations, bury the ghosts. None returned. Days later, their weapons were found neatly stacked outside the human gallery. Next to them, carved into stone, was another phrase: "You cannot bury memory." And the crowds believed. Across the empire, statues of Dominion rulers were defaced, replaced with crude carvings of human faces. Soldiers deserted. Archivists abandoned their posts, streaming toward the museum as if answering a call older than loyalty. The Dominion had wanted to preserve extinction. Instead, they had awakened resurrection. And somewhere deep inside the museum, behind walls no scanner could penetrate, something was waiting to step out of memory and into flesh again. The Dominion called it blasphemy. The people called it a miracle. Either way, what happened next could never be undone. The crowd outside the museum had grown into a sea. Citizens pressed shoulder to shoulder, their voices raw from chanting, their banners painted with crude human silhouettes. Dominion soldiers stood in rigid lines, weapons drawn, but none dared to advance. Then the ground trembled. At first it was subtle, a vibration running through the soles of their boots, a low hum in the bones of their teeth. But soon it swelled into a rhythm, steady, undeniable. A heartbeat. The museum itself was breathing. Its gates swung wider. Cold air spilled out, carrying the smell of old paper, smoke, and something sharper, ozone, as though storms had been caged inside. The crowd fell silent as a figure stepped from the darkness. It was not Dominion. It was not machine. It was human, or something close enough to terrify the Empire. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, its outline flickering like an image fighting to stay solid. Its skin was pale, almost luminous, its eyes burning with impossible memory. And though its mouth never moved, its voice filled every skull in the plaza. We were forgotten, but we did not forget. Chaos erupted. Some fell to their knees, weeping. Others screamed and fled. Soldiers raised their weapons, but when they fired, the plasma bolts slowed in mid-air, dissolving into harmless sparks before touching the figure. The being took another step forward. Stone cracked beneath its feet. It was not flesh in the way Dominion biology understood. It was memory given muscle, a reconstruction of humanity, built not from bone and blood, but from every whisper, every fragment, every terrified recollection preserved in the museum's halls. And still the heartbeat thundered, coming not from the figure but from the museum itself. The crowd erupted into chants again, louder, wilder. No longer we remember, now it was something else. They return. Inside the council chambers miles away, Dominion leaders watched the footage with frozen horror. Analysts stammered about holograms, mass hallucinations, resonance frequencies, but none of their words drowned out the truth playing across every screen. Something long extinct was walking again. And it was only the beginning. For deep within the museum, other exhibits stirred. Bones rattled against glass, fossils glowed, entire dioramas flickered with strange new life. The museum had not been built to honor extinction. It had been built as a vault, a seed bank of civilizations, and the humans were the first seed to sprout. The Dominion had feared rebellion. They hadn't realized they had cultivated resurrection. The plaza outside the museum was chaos. Citizens pressed forward to touch the glowing figure. Dominion soldiers backed away in fear, and the air itself vibrated with the sound of a heartbeat that was not alive, but eternal. And then the gates opened wider. From within the yawning black came movement, shapes, shadows, more than one. The crowd gasped as the first emerged, a towering beast clad in golden plates of armor, its head like that of a lion but with eyes that burned white as suns. It was a reconstruction, a memory of a predator from some other extinct world, called forth from the archives. Behind it, a dozen more stepped forward. Some walked like men, others slithered, some floated. Each one was impossible, each one a legend brought to flesh. They did not look like humans, not yet. They were other civilizations long erased, now given strange bodies of half-light, half-solid matter. The people of the Dominion had come to see a rebellion. Instead, they were witnessing a resurrection of everything their empire had buried. A woman in the crowd cried out, "The museum is choosing them, the forgotten are choosing." And in a sense, she was right. Because not all exhibits stirred. Not all bones glowed. Some remained still, trapped in glass, silent as tombstones. But the ones that did awaken, their memories were strong enough to anchor them back into reality. Humanity's spark had triggered it. The first domino in a chain the Dominion could not stop. Inside the command center, Dominion generals shouted over each other, "Seal the plaza! Bombard the district before it spreads! No, contain it! Capture the constructs for study!" But the feed showed the truth. Soldiers could not even touch them. Plasma fire unraveled into dust. Kinetic rounds bent in the air. The museum's creations were untouchable. The human figure, the one who had first emerged, turned its glowing eyes on the soldiers, and for a moment, its voice filled the entire city like thunder. "Extinction was your lie. Memory is our weapon. We are not relics. We are return." And then, one by one, the beings that had stepped out of the museum began walking not into the crowd, not toward the soldiers, but into the streets beyond. Every city screen flickered to the same image, the museum's gates yawning wide and the dead walking again. The Dominion had ruled by promising eternal order. Now order was crumbling under the weight of resurrection. And the greatest question whispered through the city, through every home, every alley. If the museum could bring back a human, what else might be waiting in its halls? What if entire armies still slumbered inside? The crowd outside could only see shadows and figures emerging, but within the museum, the air shimmered like the surface of water disturbed by a storm. For centuries, visitors had walked those halls believing the exhibits were just that: displays, bones, glass cases filled with silent reminders of species erased by time and empire. But now, those same halls pulsed with light. The walls rippled. The floors throbbed as if the stone itself had veins. Somewhere in the depths, a heartbeat thundered. The Dominion soldiers who had stormed in earlier now stumbled back in terror. Their rifles felt useless, their orders irrelevant. They had expected dusty artifacts and archived records. Instead, they saw entire worlds being rebuilt around them. One stepped into a chamber labeled the Seren Dominion, erased by assimilation. What should have been empty glass cases now swirled with oceans of blue light. Towers rose, shimmering structures, alien cities flickering into place. The soldier turned, shouting for backup, but when he did, he saw a Seren themselves, a being with skin like polished obsidian, eyes burning like molten fire. It looked at him. It remembered him. And it stepped forward. Deeper still, the humans walked, drawn like moths to the light. They saw galleries where bones reassembled themselves, not into static skeletons, but into living things that inhaled breath after centuries of silence. Some were humanoid. Others were so alien they could not even be described with words, and yet each one turned to look at the humans with recognition. It was as if the humans had been the key. The museum had waited for a spark of survival, a defiance of extinction itself, and now that spark was loose. But there was something stranger still, beyond the displays, deeper than the galleries. A section sealed off by walls of black metal, pulsing with glyphs that twisted like smoke. A sign, faded with age, hung crooked across the doors. It read, "The Forgotten Wing closed to visitors." The humans stared. Soldiers tried to approach, but the metal dissolved at their touch, reforming behind them as if rejecting their presence. But when one of the humans placed their hand against the surface, the wall shivered open, revealing a spiral staircase of light descending into a void. The Dominion commanders watching on the feed erupted in panic. "That wing is sealed. It was never meant to be accessed." "Shut it down. Shut everything down before it spreads." But it was too late, for the humans had already begun their descent. And as they did, the walls whispered, not in one voice, but in many. Thousands of voices overlapping, a chorus of civilizations erased, yet still alive. And their message was simple. We were not extinct. We were waiting. The spiral staircase stretched downward for what felt like miles, carved not from stone but from light itself. Each step pulsed beneath the humans' feet, like walking across the ribs of something alive. The Dominion soldiers refused to follow, leaving the humans to descend alone. At the bottom, the staircase widened into a cavern that did not look like a museum at all. It looked like a cathedral, built by no single hand, no single species. Colossal pillars rose from the ground, etched with glyphs that shifted as though aware of being watched. The air shimmered with something heavier than silence. Like memory itself had weight here. At the center of the chamber was a monolith, black, impossibly smooth, taller than a skyscraper. It hummed, a sound so low it vibrated inside their bones. The plaque at its base was written in a language no Dominion archive had ever recorded. Yet when the humans gazed at it, they understood. It read, "The first extinction." The air grew colder. The walls whispered. This was not a gallery of displays. This was not a record. It was a warning. The humans approached, and the monolith shifted. Its surface rippled like water, and then it opened. Not outward, not inward, downward, like a throat swallowing them whole. Against every instinct, the humans stepped closer, drawn as though the entire museum had been guiding them to this moment. And then, images erupted. Not on walls, not in holograms, but inside their minds. They saw civilizations older than the Dominion, older than any star chart had recorded, species of light and storm, creatures whose bodies wrapped entire planets like vines, civilizations that had bent galaxies into gardens, and then vanished. The whispers grew louder. "We were first. We built everything you see. And we learned extinction is not always natural." The humans staggered. These beings were not just records of the past. They were alive, preserved here in something deeper than memory, waiting, watching. And then, one voice separated itself from the chorus. It was colder, sharper, a voice that did not mourn. It said, "We were not erased. We chose silence. Because what came for us will come again." The humans froze. The Dominion commanders, watching on scrambled feeds, were in chaos. "Pull them out! Shut it down! That wing was never meant to open! Do you hear me? Never!" But the humans could not move. They were transfixed as the monolith pulsed, its surface blooming with light, forming an outline, a shape of something not human, not Dominion, but far more terrifying. And the whisper became a roar. The first extinction was not the last. The chamber trembled as the monolith's light thickened, no longer a glow, but a storm. Shadows stretched across the pillars, and every whisper became a single phrase repeated again and again. "It watches. It waits." The humans clutched their heads as images slammed into them, not visions, memories. They saw entire star systems blacken like fruit left to rot. They saw suns flicker out as though a hand had pinched their flames. They saw civilizations, mighty beyond comprehension, fall not to war, not to disaster, but to something else, something deliberate. The humans collapsed to their knees, gasping as if drowning in another species' last breaths. And then they saw it. Not a species, not an empire, something worse. A void, a shape that never had shape, a hunger that fed not on matter but on progress itself. Whenever a civilization reached a certain height, whenever they touched the edge of true transcendence, it came. Not to kill individuals, not to claim territory, but to erase the idea of them, to undo them so thoroughly that only fragments remained, locked here in this impossible archive. The humans staggered back, their hearts hammered as if their bodies understood what their minds could not. The Dominion feeds scrambled, static distorting their commanders' screams. "Shut the link down, now! If they see more, it will spread. Do you hear me? It will spread!" But the humans did see more. The monolith bent its light inward, shaping it into something clearer. A galaxy. Not theirs. Older. Scarred. A map of civilizations rising and falling in an endless pattern. But one detail broke that cycle. One faint ember that had refused to be snuffed out. A shape that defied erasure. The humans gasped. It was humanity. Not now. Not present. A projection. A possibility written into the extinction pattern itself. The whisper of the ancient voices returned, but softer, almost reverent. "You are not prey. You are the anomaly." The chamber shook. A fissure split across the monolith's surface, leaking radiant dust that curled in the air like smoke. The Dominion shouted in panic. "They've triggered it. That entire wing was sealed for a reason." But the humans could not look away, because for the first time, the monolith was not just showing them the past, it was showing them the future. And in that vision, they saw Earth, blue and fragile, suspended in black, and approaching it, a shadow that stretched across half the stars. The vision snapped away like glass shattering. The humans stumbled to the cold floor of the chamber, gasping for air, sweat dripping down their temples. The monolith stood silent once more, its fissures glowing faintly like embers hidden in stone. But the memory of what it showed burned in them, a shadow stretching toward Earth. Dominion commanders screamed through the fractured feeds. "Terminate the link! Do not allow their words to spread!" The humans looked at one another. For the first time since stepping into the museum, none of them spoke. Their silence was heavier than any scream, because every one of them had understood the same thing. They had been chosen, not as victims, not as prey, as the exception, the anomaly in a pattern of extinction. And if they told the Dominion what they'd seen, the galaxy would ignite in panic. Every species would scramble to flee, to weaponize, to erase humanity before the shadow arrived. Because the message was clear. When the void came, it would test them first. One of the humans, pale and trembling, whispered, "If they know we're the anomaly, they'll turn on us. They'll try to end us before that thing ever gets here." Another clenched their fists, staring at the monolith. "But if we stay silent, Earth won't be ready. We'll be blind when it comes." The chamber pulsed faintly, as though listening. The ancient whispers were gone now, leaving only silence, waiting for a decision. Above, Dominion enforcers cut power lines, scrambled signals, did everything to sever the humans' connection to the archive. But the damage was done. The knowledge was inside their minds now, and there was no way to erase it. The team leader stood slowly, steadying herself against the pillar. Her voice was hoarse, but her words were clear. "We can't tell them. Not yet. The Dominion fears us already. If they think we're destined to survive what erased empires before them, they'll wipe us out before the shadow even gets close." The group nodded reluctantly. Their choice was made. But silence came at a price, because even as they shut their mouths and closed their feeds, the vision lingered in their heads like a brand. The void was coming. It had always come, and Earth had little time left to prepare. The monolith flickered one last time before going dark, whispering a single phrase that only the humans heard. "Your world will burn, but from the ashes, You may rise. The floor split beneath them, lowering the chamber into unseen depths. Somewhere far below, another light awakened. Not white, not red. A deep blue glow, like the reflection of Earth's oceans in the void. The humans gripped their weapons, their voices breaking into a single question. What's waiting for us down there? The platform sank lower, grinding like stone against stone, until the ceiling above was sealed away in darkness. The humans stood tense, weapons raised, but no threat came. Only the cold hum of ancient machinery breathing in the deep. Then the light returned. Not harsh, not blinding, soft and blue, spilling out across walls of glass. They found themselves inside a colossal chamber, lined with towering vitrines. Not displays of stone or bone. These were preservations. Entire fragments of worlds, sealed in crystalline vaults, suspended in perfect stillness. One held the broken husk of a starship, tiny figures frozen mid-scream as fire consumed them. Another contained a fragment of a city street, alien children running, their laughter captured like insects in amber. This was no museum of artifacts. This was a tomb of moments. The humans moved slowly, unable to look away. Each vault was a window into the second before annihilation, stolen from dead civilizations and preserved as warnings, or trophies. The leader's voice was a whisper. They didn't just keep relics, they kept the last breath. In the center of the chamber loomed a structure unlike the rest, a sphere, enormous and pulsing with the same blue glow. Carved across its surface were thousands of names, etched in languages long dead, a roll call of the fallen. As they approached, the sphere stirred. A ripple passed over its skin, and the room filled with voices. Not whispers this time, screams. Millions of them, overlapping, desperate. The sound of extinction echoing through eternity. The humans staggered, covering their ears, but the leader forced herself forward. She pressed her hand against the sphere, and the sound cut off, leaving only silence. The sphere spoke, not in a voice, in thought. You descend knowing the pattern. You descend marked by the anomaly. You descend, chosen to carry what others could not. The humans gasped. The sphere wasn't just a record. It was a witness. And now it was speaking directly to them. The void comes. It always comes. We preserved what we could for one who might endure. You will endure. But to endure, you must become what they feared. The leader pulled her hand away, trembling. What do you mean? She whispered. The sphere pulsed again, its light sinking deeper, revealing a hidden recess at its base. A door opened, leading into blackness below. The answers lie beneath. The weapon lies beneath. The choice lies beneath. The humans stared into the dark passage. None of them spoke, because they already knew what it meant. The museum was not just a place to remember the dead. It was a forge. Something waited below, left behind for the ones who could survive. Something not meant for the Dominion. Something meant for them. The team leader took a deep breath and raised her weapon. All right, she said. We see what's waiting. And together, the humans stepped into the dark. The door sealed behind them. The descent this time felt different. Not mechanical. Not like the steady lowering of platforms or the shifting of gears. It felt alive. The passage walls pulsed faintly, veins of light running beneath the surface like buried rivers. The humans kept their weapons ready, every instinct screaming caution, but their eyes kept being drawn to the glow. It wasn't hostile, it was guiding. The tunnel opened into a cavern vast enough to swallow a city. At its center stood a structure, not a machine, not a monument, something between both. A ring of impossible size, suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly without sound. Within the ring shimmered a blackness deeper than shadow, like a hole cut out of existence. The humans stared, the weight of it crushing down on them. This wasn't just alien technology. This was something beyond technology, something stolen from the laws of the universe itself. The leader's voice cracked as she spoke. That's not a weapon. But the sphere's words echoed in her head. To endure, you must become what they feared. The humans moved closer. Their steps echoed against the cavern floor, swallowed by the silence. Symbols glowed along the ring's surface, flaring brighter as they approached. Then the blackness stirred. Not outward, inward. It pulled, tugged, a gravity that wasn't gravity, a hunger in the air. One of the soldiers stumbled forward, barely catching themselves before being drawn too close. And then, images. Not visions like before, not fragments of extinction. This was prophecy. The leader saw the Dominion burning, entire fleets torn apart in silence, ships crushed by invisible force, planets scarred, atmospheres peeled away like paper, and at the center of it, humans standing against the storm, wielding the very abyss itself. The vision ended with a single truth. This was the last archive's gift. A weapon that had destroyed those who built it. A weapon left behind for the next civilization desperate enough to try. A weapon that would either save humanity or make them the next name etched into the sphere of the dead. The leader's hand shook as she reached out. The symbols flared brighter, recognizing something in her DNA, something the others lacked. The ring slowed its rotation. The void at its center steadied, becoming almost still. And then came the voice. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, calm, certain. Do you accept? The humans froze. It wasn't asking all of them. It was asking her. Because once she touched it, there would be no return. She looked back at her squad. Their faces were pale, their weapons forgotten, their trust absolute. The leader's breath trembled. If she accepted, humanity would wield the abyss. If she refused, perhaps they would survive a little longer. Her hand hovered inches from the ring, the silence pressing in, the voice waiting, and she whispered the only word she could. Yes. The cavern ignited with light. The abyss roared to life, and the museum itself trembled as though waking from 1,000,000 years of sleep. The instant she said the word, yes, the cavern convulsed. The abyss within the ring shuddered, its black surface rippling as though something vast beneath it was trying to break through. The leader's hand remained outstretched, but instead of touching cold metal, she felt the air fracture around her, like invisible glass splintering under her palm. Her squad staggered back, weapons raised though they knew there was nothing to shoot. The walls of the cavern glowed brighter, veins of light racing outward like a heartbeat accelerating. And then, silence. The void calmed. The ring stopped its rotation. A single thread of black, impossibly thin, extended from the abyss and wrapped around her hand. It didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel physical at all. It felt like thought. The leader gasped. She wasn't standing in the cavern anymore. She was standing in a sea of stars. Galaxies swirled in silence around her, their light bending inward toward an endless horizon of black. She felt weightless yet tethered, her body a faint outline against infinity. And from the darkness came voices. Not one, not many, all. Whispers of every extinct civilization that had come before. Billions of minds, all drowned in the abyss, all speaking as one. You carry us now? Her chest ached. Her pulse thundered. She tried to speak but found no words, only the crushing weight of responsibility. The abyss responded. A ripple of power surged outward, forming a shape in her hands. Not a gun, not a blade. Something far stranger. A shard of darkness, shaped like a knife, and yet not solid, flickering like fire caught between worlds. Its edge sang with silence. She realized then what the weapon truly was. It wasn't a tool. It wasn't technology. It was memory made into force. a weapon woven from the will of the dead. She opened her eyes, and she was back in the cavern. The soldiers stared at her in horror and awe. The shard floated above her hand, dark as midnight, yet blazing brighter than any sun. The cavern walls pulsed once, as if in approval, then went still. The leader's breath trembled. She felt the shard humming in sync with her heartbeat, as if it wasn't an object at all, but part of her now. One of the soldiers whispered, "What have you done?" She had no answer, but the museum gave one. The abyss whispered across the cavern, its voice like stone cracking in the deep. The cycle begins again, and far above, beyond the cavern, beyond the museum, ships stirred. The Dominion had arrived. Their fleets dropped out of warp in orbit of the dead world, engines blazing, weapons locked. They had tracked the humans here, fearing what they might find. Now they had come to take it, or burn it, before it could awaken. The leader clenched her fist. The shard dissolved into her palm, vanishing as though it had never been. But she felt it still, resting in her chest, ready to answer when called. She looked at her squad, then at the ceiling, where the tremors of war already began to echo down from orbit. No more time for fear. No more time for hesitation. The humans were no longer just trespassers in the museum, they were its inheritors. And for the first time in history, humanity had a weapon the Dominion could not understand, let alone stop. The leader whispered a vow into the silence, one the abyss itself seemed to echo back. "They'll regret coming here." The cavern lights flared like lightning in answer. The Museum of Extinct Civilizations had chosen its champions. The night the Dominion finally came, the sky above the Museum of Extinct Civilizations turned into a wound of fire. Great ships tore open the clouds, their hulls vast enough to eclipse the moon, their engines humming with the vibration of conquest. Humanity had feared this day, whispered about it, and now it was here. But the museum was waiting. Inside its endless halls, the air grew heavy, as if the stone itself were inhaling. The walls shivered, carvings glowing faintly with the memory of dead civilizations. Artifacts vibrated on their pedestals, resonating like tuning forks, with a rhythm too ancient for human ears. The dome at the center of the museum began to crackle with unseen energy, arcs of lightning lacing across the ceiling, and in the very heart of it, the shard pulsed in Alex's hands. It felt alive now, no longer a relic, but a seed ready to grow. With every Dominion ship that pushed through the atmosphere, the shard's light sharpened, bleeding through Alex's fingers like molten fire. Outside, the Dominion began their descent in terrifying silence. Massive landers plunged toward the surface, unfolding as they touched down, spilling out ranks of soldiers encased in living armor. Their war machines hissed as they deployed, each one tall as buildings, bristling with weapons designed to erase resistance. The human defense forces on the perimeter prepared for impact, but they knew the truth. Against the Dominion, conventional weapons were little more than fireworks. They were here to delay, to buy time, time for the museum. Alex felt the shard tug at him like a compass pointing deeper into the structure. The museum wanted him to go further, to places he hadn't dared explore. Behind him, Mara and Dr. Kincaid followed, their eyes darting nervously to the glowing walls. The air smelled faintly of smoke and ozone, though no fire had yet touched this place. They reached the grand atrium just as the first tremors shook the ground. A massive Dominion walker landed outside, its steps rattling the glass cases around them. And then, with a sudden groan, the museum's floor itself shifted. A great stone circle at the center rotated, revealing a staircase plunging downward into blackness. The shard flared in Alex's hand, pointing toward it. The message was clear. Go down. But Mara's voice was tight. If we go deeper now, we might not come back. We'll be sealed in. Kincaid, sweat running down his temples, whispered what they were all thinking. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the only way out is through. Above them, the museum's dome lit up in a vast web of golden energy, just as the first blast from a Dominion warship slammed into it. The beam, capable of vaporizing entire cities, hit the barrier and refracted harmlessly into the sky, like sunlight on water. The Dominion had expected a relic. What they found was a fortress. The museum had chosen its battlefield, and it was calling its champions into the dark. The stairs spiraled downward, carved of black stone that seemed older than the earth itself. Each step hummed faintly under their feet, as though resonating with the shard's glow. Alex tightened his grip on it, feeling not only the heat, but also a rhythm, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Behind them, the ground shook violently. The Dominion had unleashed their assault in full, hammering the museum's golden dome with weapons that should have cracked planets. And yet, every strike fizzled into nothing, the barrier bending light and energy as though mocking the laws of physics. The Dominion soldiers roared their alien battle cries outside, their shadows stretching through the entrance halls. But the museum's walls sealed themselves, closing the invaders out. The deeper Alex, Mara, and Kincaid went, the stranger the air became. It tasted metallic, charged with static. Whispers drifted in the dark, not words but impressions, like the sigh of forgotten worlds. The stairwell ended at a chamber vast enough to swallow a cathedral, and there, suspended in the center, was the source. A colossal crystal, fractured and ancient, floated weightless above the ground. Lightning coursed through its veins, bleeding into the air in golden arcs. Around it stood the remnants of machines, humanoid in shape but long-dead petrified statues of something that had once guarded this place. The shard in Alex's hand blazed like a piece of that crystal, torn free long ago. It pulled him forward with invisible strings until he stood beneath the towering relic. Mara grabbed his arm, her voice a sharp whisper. "Wait! What if joining it kills you?" But Alex barely heard her. The shard wasn't just light now, it was memory. Images struck him. Civilizations rising and falling, galaxies burning, titans of flesh and steel locked in wars older than Earth. He saw entire species reduced to dust, their only legacy stored here in the museum. And he saw the Dominion too. Not new, not unique, but another chapter in a cycle that had happened countless times before. The shard throbbed with a single command: choose. Kincaid stepped closer, his face pale. "It's offering you something. Power? A weapon?" Alex's chest heaved. He could feel it. This wasn't just a relic, it was a key. If he pressed the shard into the great crystal, it would awaken the museum fully. Its guardians, its weapons, its hidden truths. But there was a catch. He could feel that too, like a blade against his thoughts. The museum required a tether, a living mind to anchor its awakening. Whoever made that connection would never be the same again. Above them, the muffled roar of Dominion bombardment grew louder. The dome was holding, but it trembled now, like a bubble stretched too thin. The museum could resist only so long without the shard completing the circuit. Mara's eyes burned into Alex. "If you do this, you may not come back." Alex raised the shard. The crystal pulsed in answer, opening like an eye. The Dominion's shadows were already crawling into the stairwell behind them, soldiers forcing their way inside. Time was gone. He pressed the shard forward, and the museum woke. The shard fused into the crystal with a sound like thunder underwater. A shockwave rippled outward, not heat, not pressure, something deeper, something that passed through bone and memory. Alex staggered as light swallowed him, searing through his mind like a storm of 1,000 voices all shouting at once. The museum awoke. The petrified guardians around the chamber stirred, cracks racing through their stone-like shells. One by one, they peeled free of centuries of dust. Their eyes ignited with burning white fire, their movements slow but unstoppable. Colossal figures of bronze and obsidian, each bearing weapons no human tongue had names for, rose from their slumber. Above, the golden dome blazed like a second sun. The Dominion's warships unleashed a final barrage, detonations that could have leveled cities and were instantly unraveled, shredded to harmless sparks against the barrier. Then the barrier didn't just hold, it pushed back. A beam of raw light lashed out from the dome, cutting through the void. A Dominion battleship split apart in silence, its massive bulk collapsing like paper struck by fire. Inside, Dominion soldiers poured down the stairwell, armored beasts with weapons humming. But before they could fire, the museum itself shifted. Walls reshaped, floors twisted, the architecture flowing like liquid. Corridors sealed behind them, stairways vanished into solid stone. The Dominion warriors roared in panic as they were swallowed by the building, their screams echoing briefly before silence claimed them. Kincaid whispered, voice trembling with awe. "It's fighting back, like it's alive." And Alex felt it. His mind wasn't his alone anymore. The crystal's consciousness pressed against his, not crushing, not erasing, but merging. He could see through the museum's senses, its vast halls, its endless vaults of memory, its guardians awakening one by one across its sprawling chambers. But it wasn't just a fortress. It was asking him, "What do you want me to be?" He saw choices flashing before him. The museum could become a weapon, a beacon, a refuge. He could direct it against the Dominion, burn them from the stars in one blinding wave. Or he could shield Earth, raising barriers so strong no enemy would ever touch humanity again. Or he could open the vaults fully, unleashing every forgotten secret of extinct civilizations into the galaxy. A flood of knowledge that could uplift or drown everything. Mara's voice cut through the storm in his head. "Alex, it's in you, isn't it? You're connected to it." His voice came out strange, layered with echoes not his own. "It needs a will to guide it. Without me, it's chaos." Outside, the Dominion faltered. Their fleet scattered, commanders screaming through fractured comms. They had come to claim a museum of relics. Instead, they had awakened a living archive older than their empire, and now, through Alex, it was choosing its first act in countless millennia. The light inside Alex's mind sharpened, no longer a storm, but a river, flowing steady and bright. He could see the museum not just as stone and halls, but as a living organism, a vast intelligence that had slumbered for millennia. It was waiting, bound to him now, but offering choice. He felt the weight of every civilization that had ever walked its galleries. The extinct ones whispered in his ears. Triumphs, failures, last words etched into history. Humanity's name was not yet carved in those halls, but it could be. The question was, how? The Dominion fleet reassembled in the distance, hundreds of ships forming into a ragged line. Their commanders were desperate, screaming for victory, for blood, for revenge. They didn't realize they were ants charging into a hurricane. Alex clenched his fists. Power surged in his veins, terrifying and exhilarating. With a single thought, he could unmake them. 100,000 lives erased in an instant. The museum would obey. But then he remembered Earth, his students, the crowded cities, the people who still believed history was nothing but dusty books and forgotten ruins. If he turned the museum into a weapon, humanity would inherit the same curse as the Dominion. Endless conquest, endless enemies. "No," he whispered, voice cracking. "Not like them. Never like them." The crystal pulsed, listening. Instead of destruction, Alex poured his will into a different vision. Not war, memory. The dome flared with impossible brilliance. The Dominion fleet froze in panic, certain annihilation was coming. But no fire rained down. Instead, every ship, every soldier, every commander felt something pierce their minds. Memories not theirs. Civilizations long dead, mistakes repeated, hubris punished. They saw the rise and collapse of empires greater than their own, their arrogance mirrored and shattered. The Dominion ships broke formation, some retreating, some paralyzed, others simply weeping as their commanders screamed into silence. Their empire's certainty cracked in that instant. They had seen their future, and it ended in dust. Inside, the Guardians lowered their weapons. The halls quieted. The museum settled, no longer raging, no longer asleep. It had found a guide. Mara grabbed Alex's arm. What? What did you do? I showed them what extinction looks like, Alex said, his voice hollow. And I made sure they understood it doesn't have to be ours. Kincaid gave a short, shaky laugh. You just turned a museum into the most terrifying warning label in history. Alex didn't answer. He was staring upward, where the dome still glowed faintly. He could feel the museum's presence inside him, like a second heartbeat. It wasn't gone. It would never be gone. He was its voice now. But in the silence, one truth gnawed at him. The museum had asked him to guide it. But for how long? Would it always obey his will, or would there come a time when its hunger for memory outweighed his humanity? For now, the Dominion fled. For now, Earth was safe. But Alex knew this was only the beginning. He had opened doors that could never be closed again. The Museum of Extinct Civilizations had awakened, and it was watching. And so the museum remains, no longer silent, no longer forgotten, a vault of everything lost, waiting for the choices of those who dare to awaken it. But tell me, if you were in Alex's place, with the fate of civilizations in your hands, what choice would you have made?